I had just finished finals and was planning to spend the night at home with my boyfriend Jimmy. We were both exhausted from the semester and just wanted to hang out and watch Netflix. But right after dinner, Jimmy got a call from his brother Derek. I could only hear half of the conversation, but it sounded like something really bad had happened. Jimmy looked horrified. When he got off the phone, he told me that his mother was in the hospital. She'd fallen down the stairs in her house and was pretty messed up. He said that she was in surgery now and he'd have to go straight to the hospital. I felt so sorry for him. I gave him a big hug and then he ran off. Now, alone in the house, I didn't know what to do. I tried to watch some TV, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about Jimmy's poor mother. I ended up just sitting there, not doing anything at all. About an hour later, there was a knock on the door. I ran to answer it, hoping that Jimmy had come back to tell me that his mom was fine. But when I opened the door, I saw his brother Derek standing outside. He had a bouquet of flowers in his hand. I assumed that the flowers were for his mom, but then he handed them to me and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, and asked about his mother's condition. He shrugged, and in a very casual voice, he said, "Yeah, she's probably not going to make it." I didn't know Derek that well. I'd only ever seen him at family gatherings, and even then he usually just hung out with Jimmy and their cousins. Every once in a while I'd catch him staring at me, but I never really thought anything of it at the time. He walked inside, shoving the bouquet at me until I took it. He was acting very strange. I assumed that he was in shock. He got pretty close to my face and whispered, "You look hot tonight." Then he walked past me and sat on the sofa. He patted the cushion, waiting for me to join him. I really didn't know how to respond. I set the flowers on the table and sat next to him. I asked him why he wasn't in the hospital. He just shrugged. I waited for a long time for him to say something, and then he smiled and said, "I wanted to get you alone." "What?" I asked. That was when he told me the most horrible thing I'd ever heard. He said that he'd always loved me, that his brother didn't deserve me, that he had to find a way to be alone with me so he could tell me how he felt. He slid his hand on my shoulder, but I pulled away. "Aren't you upset about your mother?" And he laughed. He seriously laughed about his own mother falling down the stairs. I looked into his wide, crazy eyes, and I had to ask, "Did you push your mom down the stairs just so you could get Jimmy out of the house?" I wanted him to scoff at the suggestion, to tell me that the idea was ridiculous. But to my horror, his mouth widened into a big, proud grin. "Desperate times call for desperate measures," he said. "I love you." I knew that there was no way I could reason with this psycho. I had to get away from him fast. I jumped off the sofa and ran to the front door. But before I could reach it, he raced toward me and blocked my way. I was forced to spin around and run upstairs. I was frantic, but I figured I could lock myself in one of the bedrooms and then call the police. He was too fast, though. He caught up to me at the top of the stairs and grabbed me by the neck. I tried to push him off, but he squeezed into my neck and I couldn't breathe. "I'm gonna ask you one more time," he said. "Do you love me?" I choked, gasping for air. "Answer carefully. I don't want you to suffer the same fate as my mother." He held me close to the edge. If I didn't say exactly what he wanted, he'd shove me off the step. Suddenly, he loosened his grip on my throat so I could answer. Without thinking, I said, "Yes, I love you." "And you'll break up with Jimmy so that we can be together?" I nodded. "And you won't tell anyone about what I did tonight, right?" No, of course not." That was what he wanted to hear. He let go of my neck completely. His lips were dry and cracked. I felt physically sick. Thankfully, the kiss didn't last too long. But It gave me the strength I needed to finally fight back. I grabbed him by the shoulders, pretending to go in for a second kiss. But then I twisted to the side and shoved him down the stairs. I'll always remember the terrible crunching sound when his head struck the floor. I stared at him for the longest time, but he didn't move. He was dead. Soon after that, my brother called from the hospital. Miraculously, his mother was going to be okay. She had a few broken bones and a concussion, but there had been no serious damage. Somehow, that 65-year-old woman had survived what her own son couldn't. Then Jimmy asked me the question that I was dreading. He wanted to know if I'd heard from Derek. I knew that he genuinely loved his brother and had no idea how crazy Derek really was. If I told him the truth, that I'd killed him, I worried that Jimmy would never forgive me. So I lied. I told him that Derek had come to the house and was so overwhelmed by what happened to his mother that he flung himself down the stairs. Jimmy didn't say anything for a while. Then, slowly, he said, I knew that something was wrong when I talked to him. Is he okay? I don't know, I lied again. I just called the ambulance. After the paramedics left, I went to the hospital to see Jimmy and his mom. We didn't say much. I knew his mom was lying when she said that she fell by accident, and she knew I was lying about what really happened to Derek. We were both protecting Jimmy from the truth about his brother. To this day, no one else knows what really happened.
After 3 years of dating, my husband Jim and I finally got married this summer. I loved him more than anything, and I knew that he loved me. We had a pretty small, inexpensive wedding, but decided to go all out for our honeymoon. We rented a beautiful beach house for 2 weeks. At first, everything was perfect. We spent our days on the beach, ate wonderful seafood, and shared romantic nights in one of the most beautiful places you could imagine. Then, something strange happened. On our 3rd day there, Jim found out that there was an emergency at his office, and he needed to spend a few hours Zooming with clients. He told me to go have brunch by myself, and he'd meet me as soon as he was done. The honeymoon had been going so well that I didn't mind. I told him to do what he had to do, and then I left for brunch. I was eating by myself at a cozy beachside restaurant when Jim came over and surprised me. I'd only been gone for about 30 minutes, so I was shocked that he'd already finished his work stuff. I asked him if he wanted to eat with me, and he got this really flirty look and told me that he had something else in mind. He took my hand, and together, we snuck into the restaurant bathroom and locked the door behind us. I won't tell you what we did in there, but Jim was absolutely wild. We'd never done anything like that before, and it was honestly the most thrilling and romantic thing we'd ever done. Afterwards, we went back to my table, and the waiter was glaring at me. I think he knew what we had been up to, so I gave him a very big tip and started to hurry off with Jim. Jim told me that he still had some work to do. It was too awkward for me to stay in the restaurant, so I walked along the beach for a bit, thinking about how in love I was, and then slowly headed back to the beach house. When I got back to the beach house, I saw Jim hunched over his computer in the middle of a Zoom call. I was surprised that he had gone straight back to work after what we've just done at the restaurant. He was so busy that he didn't even raise his head to say hello. I let him do his own thing for the next couple hours. Once he finished, he joined me on the balcony and we drank together. He asked me about my day, not even mentioning the restaurant. I smiled at him and told him it was the most surprising and romantic morning of my life. He pretended to be confused and asked me what I was talking about. I thought he was being romantic again, so I recounted everything we'd done. His eyes got really wide and then he jumped out of his chair and left. I didn't even have time to ask him where he was going. As I stayed on the balcony, I could hear him through the wall. He was shouting at someone on the phone. He sounded furious. Then the door opened and Jim stuck his head out. He asked me to drive down to the market and pick up some vegetables, but I could tell he just wanted me out of the house. I was really confused, but I didn't want to argue with him on our honeymoon. When I came back about 20 minutes later, Jim was waiting for me in the living room. All the anger from earlier was gone. He seemed like his old romantic self. He even had a glass of wine waiting for me. I wasn't in the mood for any more alcohol, so I refused, but he seemed weirdly insistent that I drink it. I told him that I wasn't going to drink anything until he told me what was going on. I needed to know why he'd gotten so upset and who he'd been on the phone with. Once again, he refused to answer. He asked me to leave with him. He said he had a special surprise waiting for me, but I had to leave with him right away. I was about to say yes until I heard noises coming from the closet right behind me. Jim stepped forward and tried to kiss me, but it seemed like he was distracting me from whatever was inside that closet. I pushed past him and opened the door. I saw someone tied up on the closet floor. There was a bag over his head, so I couldn't see who it was. The man was writhing around, barely conscious. Jim grabbed me from behind and whispered in my ear, "We have to leave now. I'll explain everything in the car." None of this made any sense. I tried to push him back, but he grabbed me with all his strength. I was so startled that I shoved him backward without even realizing it. He fell onto the top of the living room table, banging his head pretty bad. As Jim struggled to stand up, I rushed back to the closet and pulled the bag off of that man's face. It was Jim, the real Jim. I turned back toward the man who I thought was my husband, and he looked identical to Jim, except for that crazed look in his eyes. I pulled the duct tape off of my husband's mouth, and he gasped for air. "My brother," he struggled to say. "My twin brother." Now it all made sense. The man who had surprised me during brunch was never my husband. It was his twin. I had no idea that Jim had a brother, let alone an identical twin. By then, his brother had rushed back toward me and grabbed me from behind. "You should have come with me," he growled in my ear. Jim was still struggling to untie his feet and stand up, so he couldn't protect me. His brother grabbed me by the throat and started pushing me toward the front door. I tried to tell him to stop, but he was squeezing so hard that I could barely move. I was starting to pass out. It seemed like this man was going to take me away. There was nothing I could do about it. But before we could reach the front door, Jim had finally freed himself. He dove at his brother, and the two of them started fighting wildly. They seemed pretty evenly matched. They struggled throughout the whole room and onto the balcony. With a horrible scream, Jim slammed his fist into his twin's face, knocking the man over the ledge and onto the rocky ground far below. I ran onto the balcony to see if my husband was okay. He was bleeding and gasping for breath, but otherwise he seemed fine. "I'm so sorry I never told you about him," he said. "I didn't know that the hospital released him." We held each other for a long time. Slowly, I looked over the edge of the balcony to see the man's body lying on the ground below. But no one was there. He was already gone. We called the police after that, but Jim's brother was never found.
I was in the middle of the city when it started pouring rain. I didn't have a jacket and decided to go into Starbucks and wait it out. It was pretty busy at the time. I guess a lot of people wanted to get out of the rain. As I walked toward the counter, I saw my Aunt Kathy through the crowd. She was sitting at a table in the corner. I was about to go over and say hi when a man walked out of the restroom and sat next to her. He was young and extremely handsome. He definitely wasn't Uncle Mark. I was too shocked to move. Then Kathy jerked backwards and pushed him away. She had spotted me. She whispered something in his ear and then got up and walked toward me. She said hi and acted really friendly, as if I hadn't just caught her cheating on my uncle. She asked me how I was doing, but before I could even answer, she offered to treat me to a coffee. I just wanted to leave, but she grabbed me by the arm and pulled me toward the counter. I awkwardly ordered a latte and Kathy paid. I had no idea what to say. Eventually I said, "Thanks. I'll let you get back to your friend." Aunt Kathy grabbed me by the shoulders, looking directly into my eyes and asked, "You're not going to say anything, are you?" I told her that I wasn't, but she could tell that I was lying. She hugged me really tightly and told me to take care of myself. Then she turned around and went back to her friend. I watched as she leaned close to his ear and whispered something to him. He looked at me with a blank expression. I got my latte pretty soon after that and decided to get out of there. I didn't care that it was still pouring rain. I hurried down the street looking for another shop that I can go inside. The street was mostly office buildings, so I couldn't find anywhere to go. I rounded a corner, which led me into an alley. It was a dead end. I was about to turn back onto the main street when someone grabbed me from behind. I spun around and saw Kathy's boyfriend looking down at me. Back in the coffee shop, I hadn't realized how huge he was. He towered over me. "Hi," he said in a threatening voice. "What can I do to make all this go away?" I looked around. No one else could see us. We were all alone in that alley. "Nothing," I told him. "But it's okay. I won't say anything." "That's not what Kathy said," he muttered. I started to back away. I told him that I didn't want any trouble. He reached into his pocket. For a second, I thought he was going to pull out some money to bribe me, but instead, he pulled out a knife. He raised it to eye level, making sure that I could see just how long and sharp it was. "Kathy and I have a good thing going," he said. "No one's going to get between us." And before I could say anything, he jabbed me in the stomach. I twisted out of the way, but the knife still grazed me in the side. The man jumped on top of me, pressing me hard against the brick wall. Pain surged through me. I was drenched with rain, and I could feel the gash on my side. He shoved me again, and the back of my head banged against the wall. He held me in place and raised the knife blade to my throat. "I can't let you talk," he said. Before he could cut me again, I kneed him in the groin. I guess that surprised him because he doubled over. Without his hand pressing against me, I started to run back onto the main street. Suddenly, I saw Kathy standing in my way. She wasn't looking at me, though. She was staring horrified at her boyfriend. "What are you doing?" she asked him. "That's my niece!" Then she reached out. "Give me the knife!" I started to calm down. I knew that my aunt would never allow someone to kill me. I stood off to the side as Kathy slowly approached her lover. He mumbled something and handed her the knife. "Thank you," Kathy said. She looked at the knife blade for a long moment, and then she added, "You can't kill my niece. Let me do it." Then she turned toward me, holding the knife out. I was wrong. She was going to hurt me. The man grabbed me by the arm to hold me in place while Kathy walked toward me with the knife extended. She slashed it through the air. She was my aunt. I've known her since I was a baby. How could she even think of hurting me just to keep her affair a secret? "You can't do this," I told her. "I'm sorry, hon. I just can't let Mark know about him. You understand." And then she thrust the knife forward. She would have stabbed me in the stomach if I hadn't twisted to the side at the last second, pushing the man in front of me. Kathy was moving too fast to stop herself, and she slammed the knife into her lover's stomach. He crumpled to the ground at my feet. Kathy screamed in horror, falling to her knees. With her boyfriend bleeding on the ground, she held him and told him it was going to be okay. Blood dripped out of his mouth, mixing with the rain falling on his face. Kathy grabbed the handle of the knife, but the man begged her not to pull it out. His mouth was too filled with blood for her to understand, though, and she pulled it out anyway. She probably thought she was helping him. He gasped once and then fell back. He was dead. Kathy turned toward me, pure hatred in her eyes. But it was too late. I was already running away. I raced back into the Starbucks where I knew I'd be safe. From there, I called the police. Once they arrived, they found the man lying dead in the alley. They still haven't found Kathy, though. I doubt they ever will.
I was in high school when Snapchat first came out. It was a lot more basic back then. Basically, all you could do was send people these short clips and then they'd disappear. I wasn't really interested in it, but my best friend Danny forced me to use it. Every day, he'd send me dozens of stupid stuff. Sometimes they were skateboarding tricks or funny things his mom said. Sometimes he'd just look into the camera and tell me a joke. I loved Danny, but I thought Snapchat was really annoying. After graduating, I started college in another town and lost touch with Danny. I think he felt like I'd abandoned him when I moved away. He ended up working at his dad's company, which I know he hated. I tried calling him every once in a while, but he never answered. I wasn't friends with anyone else on Snapchat, so I kind of forgot that I even had it. Then, one night, I saw when I got a new message from Danny. It came in about 2 o'clock in the morning when I was asleep. My phone woke me up. I clicked on the message and saw a 5-second video of Danny looking directly into the camera. Blood was trickling out of his mouth, and he mumbled one word: help. Then the video shut off. I was half asleep at the time, and my brain really didn't register what I was seeing. I guess I just thought it was some dumb prank, but I put my phone back on the end table and went back to sleep. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized how strange that video was. I didn't think it was real, of course, but I didn't know why Danny would send me that after all this time of no contact. I decided to skip my morning classes and stayed in my dorm. I called Danny, but again, he didn't answer. Then I called Danny's mom. She seemed very surprised to hear from me. I asked her if Danny was around, and she said no and hung up on me. Had something happened to Danny? I didn't know who else to call, and I couldn't go back to my hometown. I realized that maybe the best way to contact him would be through Snapchat. So I took out my phone and recorded a short video asking if Danny was okay. Then I hit send. Less than a minute later, I got a response. It was a single photo of Danny sitting at his desk and smiling. A caption said, "Just fine." But I knew that he wasn't fine. That photo was from over a year ago. I recognized the photo because I had taken it. Something had happened to him, and someone else was using his phone. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have any evidence. The video he sent had disappeared, and I didn't know how to bring it back. I called my parents to ask them if they could go over to Danny's house and check on him. They seemed confused, so I tried to explain what was happening. They didn't understand a word I was saying. They'd never heard of Snapchat, and I guess I was sounding a little frantic. Eventually, they told me to calm down and focus on my studies. Then they ended the call. Without any other options, I decided to leave school and fly back home. If my best friend had been killed, I needed to find out. I ended up paying hundreds of dollars for a last-minute flight, but I was able to arrive back home that afternoon. When I got to the airport, I tried calling my parents again to pick me up, but they didn't answer. I called a couple of my other high school friends, but no one was willing to come get me. I ended up spending a lot of money on a taxi just to get all the way back to my house. When I got home, my house was empty. Both my parents were at work. Thankfully, I still had the keys to my dad's truck, so I used that to drive straight to Danny's house. When I pulled onto his street, I saw that there were dozens of cars parked near Danny's house. It looked like they were having a big barbecue or something. I walked inside without even knocking and saw Danny's parents drinking wine and celebrating with their friends. Everyone was talking and laughing, but when they noticed me, everyone got really quiet. I asked where Danny was, and his mom awkwardly said that he was at work. I didn't believe that for a second. I pulled out my phone and called Danny's number. I heard his phone starting to ring in his mom's pocket. She looked at me for a long moment and then shouted,
"Get him!"
Instantly, everyone at the party started running towards me. The front door was still open, so I ran out of the house. I wasn't fast enough though, because Danny's dad tackled me to the ground. As I screamed for help, he pulled me back inside. I kept struggling to get away, but he kicked me on the side of my head and I blacked out. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair. Everyone was gone except for Danny's parents. They stood over me, glaring. "What did you do to Danny?" I asked. I was woozy from my concussion, so I slurred my words. His father walked closer. "What do you know?" he asked. "I know that he's dead," I said. "I know that you killed him and you're trying to cover it up." He slapped me across the face. "And what evidence do you have?" I didn't have anything. The only proof I had was the video they sent me of him dying, and that was gone forever. "Nothing," I said. "So just let me go." They exchanged looks, each trying to figure out what to do. Then, Danny's mother walked towards me and started to untie me. She got really close to my ear and whispered, "Danny moved away. That's all. And if you say otherwise, no one will believe you." Once I was free, I ran out of the house and into my dad's truck. I drove straight to the police station and told them that Danny's parents had murdered him. I gave them every detail, and I showed them the bruises I'd gotten from being tackled to the ground. The cop wrote everything down, but I could tell that he didn't believe me. He slammed his notebook shut and told me that he'd look into it. Then he asked me to leave. As I walked out of his office, I realized that he was one of the people at Danny's house party. So of course, he wasn't going to do anything. When I got back home, my parents were furious that I'd taken my dad's car and skipped school. I tried to explain what happened, but they just didn't believe me. My mom even said that Danny's parents were upstanding citizens who would never do anything illegal. They paid for my return flight and sent me back to college. This all happened several years ago. Everyone still thinks that Danny moved away. The police never investigated him, and no one seems to care that he's gone. Over time, I've given up on trying to convince people that Danny was killed. I know that no one will believe me.
Never have I felt more violated than I did at that hotel. It was my last night on a grueling 4-day road trip from Houston to Portland. For 33 hours, it was just me and the open road. Since I had to make the trek alone, I couldn't push through and drive through the night. I had to stop, so my friend recommended an app designed for trips like mine. It helped me find the cheapest rate for a one-night stay. The first 2 nights were great. It was the last one that I'll never shake. I don't blame the app for what happened at all. The hotel I chose must have been a rotten egg. In the beginning, it went just as the first 2 nights did. I arrived at a standard hotel. It was nothing fancy, but it was clean. I checked in like usual. The front desk person gave me my room key, told me when their continental breakfast was served, and directed me to the elevators. It seemed completely ordinary. The room was typical too. I walked into an average hotel room and felt confident that roaches wouldn't be crawling all over me as I slept. That's all I really needed. I threw my bag on the ground and sat on the bed to assess it. It was firm, just how I liked it. The sheets were white, soft, and smelled of laundry detergent. Sometimes, I get paranoid that they don't change the sheets between travelers, so the laundry detergent smell relaxed me. All I cared to do was eat, shower, and pass out. Before stopping at the hotel, I filled my tank and grabbed some pizza from the gas station for dinner. I sat at the desk in the back corner and chowed my greasy pizza down. It had a thick crust and extra cheese. With each bite, The melted cheese would hang like a hammock between my mouth and the slice. You know that feeling that someone is watching you? Like you feel it in the back of your neck and the hair on your back begins to stand up, you know? I felt that as I munched on my pizza. I looked out my window and there wasn't another building for miles. It was impossible to be the victim of a peeping Tom at this hotel. Still, I shut my blinds and pulled the curtains before showering. The bathroom was clean, white, and felt sterile. That is exactly how I like my bathroom hotels to be. I stepped into the shower, and for the first time in days, I washed my hair using their complimentary shampoo and conditioner. After sitting in my car, cramped with all my stuff, and going in and out of gas stations all day, the shower felt like a baptism. I washed away the grime of life on the road and was ready to sleep. But that uneasy feeling in the back of my neck came back. I looked around the shower, and it looked like any shower, a standard shower head and a small tub. I peeked out to look at the bathroom, a large mirror, bright white lights, and a toilet. I told myself I was tired from the road and resumed my shower, hoping to wash away my paranoia. After my shower, I put a towel around my waist. I forgot to grab my pajamas from the bag, so I ran out to get them. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the hotel phone rang through the silence. It caught me off guard, so I gasped like a little girl. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up the phone. "Hello?" I said. At first, there was silence, so again I asked, "Hello? Tony?" A man's voice came through the line. It had a slight nasal tone to it. "How do you know my name?" "Now I know your name," he said calmly. "Who is this?" No answer. I continued. "Can I help you with something? Is there something wrong with the room?" "The room is perfect," the voice said. "I just wanted to encourage you to get comfortable and drop the towel." "What the hell?" I exclaimed, and I hung up the phone. I looked around the hotel room. There was no way someone looked in through the window, so whoever was watching me did it another way. Cameras, I thought. The room must be rigged with cameras. I looked around, wondering where all the cameras could be. Was one in the shower head? My skin crawled at the thought. Without thinking about it further, I changed into my pajamas, packed my things, and went to the front desk to get a new room. I told the woman what happened, and she agreed that it was weird and concerning. She said she would look into it and gave me a key to a new room. Right when I got into the new room, I closed the blinds and curtains. The idea of someone watching me as I ate and showered made me feel ill. I assessed the room. I looked at the phone and the lights for small cameras. I wanted to wash away how I felt, so I took another quick shower. But first, I inspected the bathroom. I looked at each individual light and took a close look at the shower head. I even checked the toilet just to be safe. You never know what creeps are into. After I felt like I wasn't being watched, I showered to try to feel better. I dried off and got dressed in the bathroom. I brushed my teeth, ready to crawl into bed and be done with whatever situation I was just in. I kept wondering how the man on the phone knew my name. As I stepped out of the bathroom, the phone rang. I stomped over to the nightstand and picked it up. "Hello?" I said with aggression. The same nasally voice came through the phone. "What's with the hostility, Tony? That's a surprising pajama choice. You struck me as a matching set kind of guy. Who is this? What do you want?" I looked around the room, trying to figure out where the camera was. What if there was more than one? "I just want to look. Is that so wrong?" "Yes," I responded and hung up the phone. I packed my things again and went down to the front desk. The same lady was there. I told her the same thing happened in the new room and asked if all the rooms were rigged with cameras. She tried to assure me there shouldn't be any cameras in any of the rooms. Then I happened to end up in the only 2 rooms rigged up. Explain that. What is going on here? She was flustered and told me she never had a guest complain about this before. I insisted she give me my money back, but she said since I booked through the app, I would have to request the refund from them. I left the hotel, got in my car, and drove for an hour until I found a Walmart parking lot I could camp out in. I wasn't going to stick around and find out anything more about that man on the phone. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there. I slept in my car that night and was dead tired when I arrived at my new place in Portland the next day. Thankfully, I never heard that creepy man's voice again.
My name is Jessica. I'm 26 years old and I work at an insurance company. I used to be kind of a party girl in school, but I've definitely settled down since then. About a month ago, I got a Facebook message from a girl named Hannah. She said that we went to high school together, but I honestly didn't recognize her photos. I sent her a pretty basic response because I didn't want her to know that I had no idea who she was. We started chatting for a bit, and she brought up a lot of stories from school that I didn't remember. She seemed nice enough, though. We ended up messaging each other for about a week. I know I should have just stopped responding, but I felt really awkward about the whole thing. Eventually, she asked if we could meet at the Starbucks near my house to catch up. I told her I was busy, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. Eventually, I gave in and agreed to meet with her on the weekend. That Saturday, I went to Starbucks, and she was there waiting for me. The only reason I knew it was her was because I recognized her face from the photos she put on Facebook. She jumped out of her chair, ran over, and gave me a hug. She acted like we were best friends or something. She even ordered me a caramel latte because she remembered that it was my favorite. And she was right, it was. We drank our coffees and talked for about an hour. She seemed to remember so much about our high school, and she kept name-dropping a lot of my friends from back then that I hadn't talked to in years. Well, the more we sat together, the guiltier I felt about lying to her. I really wanted to tell her that I didn't remember her, but it was way too late for that now. Just as we were about to leave, Hannah's smile disappeared. "I was hoping that you would say something about Dylan," she said. I didn't know who Dylan was, but I could tell from her expression that she was talking about something very serious. "Okay," I said. "How is Dylan?" Apparently that was not the question she wanted because she slapped me across the face. "Don't you dare joke about him," she said. "He's still at the bottom of the well." I was speechless. Was she talking about a dead person? Did she murder someone and then leave the body in a well? I'm sorry, I said. I figured that now was the best time to come clean. I told her that I didn't remember who she was, and I had no idea who Dylan was. I said that she seemed really nice, and I was too embarrassed to tell her that I didn't remember her. She didn't respond for a long time, and then she said that she didn't believe me. She said that I knew exactly who she was and what I did to Dylan. Now it seemed like she was accusing me of murder. I asked her to sit down so we could just talk this over, but she said she had to leave. She rushed out of there without saying goodbye. I went back home right after that and saw that Hannah had deleted her Facebook entirely. I genuinely didn't know what had just happened, but I was comforted by the fact that I'd probably never hear from her again. But for the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Hannah. I called some of my high school friends and asked them, but no one knew who she was. Then about a week later, I went to that same Starbucks. I ordered my caramel latte and sat in the corner. I was scrolling through my phone, just reading through the news, when I noticed that someone had left a book on the table next to me. It looked weirdly familiar. I grabbed it and realized that it was my high school yearbook. Now, at first, I thought it was a really strange coincidence, especially since my high school was on the other side of the state. Then I remembered Hannah and realized that she must have planted it there. I started searching through the pages, but I couldn't find anyone named Hannah at my school. However, I did find someone named Dylan. I barely knew him. I remember drinking with him at a couple of parties. We might have hooked up once or twice, but he just wasn't very memorable. I grabbed my phone and did a search of his full name. right away I found a news article about his disappearance right after graduation. There wasn't anything more recent than that, so I could only assume that he was never found. How could I not remember that happening? Feeling extremely creeped out, I left the yearbook on the table and hurried out of the building. That night I called one of my old classmates and asked her about Dylan. She didn't remember Hannah, but she definitely remembered Dylan. She told me about some wild party at a farmhouse where Dylan and I got into a big argument. That's when the memories came flooding back. I guess I'd blocked them out. Dylan and I were both pretty drunk. He said something offensive, and I stormed off. He ran after me to apologize. And that's it. I didn't remember what happened after that. Did I do something to him? Did I push him into a well? I had to find answers. I was planning to go back to my hometown for the holidays, but I decided to go a bit early. That weekend, I drove all the way back home, telling my parents that I wanted to surprise them with a visit. They were pretty surprised. After taking them both out to lunch, I drove by myself to that old farmhouse where we used to throw parties when we were teenagers. I walked all around the grounds, trying to see if I could find a well anywhere on the property. It took me a while, but I found one hidden behind some bushes. I tried to look inside to see if anything was at the bottom, but it was too dark. I thought I heard a noise behind me, but when I looked, no one was there. When I got back into town, I found one of the few remaining payphones and called the police. I gave them an anonymous tip to look into that well, but I didn't say why. Then, I went back to my parents' house. The next day, I saw on the news that the body of a missing person had just been found. They didn't give out the name, but I knew it was Dylan. The police never contacted me, and I never told anyone else about it. I'm back home now, and I still can't stop thinking about everything that happened. I still don't know who Hannah was, or what really happened to Dylan all those years ago. I want to think that I had nothing to do with his death, but I'm honestly not sure. Snapchat was our favorite platform for staying connected and capturing those moments I never wanted to forget. Little did I know that the harmless app would lead me into a web of deceit and deception. On a sunny afternoon, as I scrolled through my Snap stories, I came across a friend's post. A cryptic image that seemed to hint at a secret adventure. The image contained a shadowy figure standing in front of a weathered door. The caption read, "The key to a new world." Intrigued, I messaged my friend, Sarah, to ask what it was all about. Sarah replied almost immediately, her enthusiasm almost tangible through the screen. She revealed that she and a group of friends had embarked on a mysterious journey, following a series of clues that led to unknown destinations and a prize if you could solve it. She invited me to join in for an unforgettable experience. My curiosity spiked, and I agreed to meet her and the group at the starting point the next day. The following morning, I arrived at the coffee shop in the heart of the city where we usually gathered. Sarah was there, her eyes sparkling with excitement and more than her fair share of caffeine. She introduced me to her friends, Mark, Mia, and Alex. Apparently, we'd all gone to school together, but I couldn't recognize any of their faces. As they filled me in on their adventure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The clues were enigmatic, the destinations vague, and no one knew exactly what the prize would be. "You guys sure about this?" I asked, trying to calm my nerves with a sip of hot coffee. "Come on, it's an adventure," Sarah reassured. Our first clue was a snap of a winding road with the caption, "The journey begins." We piled into 2 cars and set out, following the unfamiliar path as if drawn by an invisible force. We had no idea where it would lead us, but the thrill of the unknown propelled us forward. Hours passed as we ventured deeper into the countryside, our surroundings growing more remote and desolate. The long stretches of farmland began to turn into patches of wild thickets. We received the next clue, a snap of a decrepit bridge with the words, "Cross the threshold." The structure looked unkempt, its wooden planks weathered and probably more rot than wood. We crossed the bridge with trepidation as our footsteps echoed into the eerie silence. Our next destination was a deserted mansion, an imposing relic from a bygone era. The snap clue was a haunting image of the mansion's facade, its windows shattered and the moon casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. The caption read, "Unravel the past." Sarah and her friends seemed exhilarated, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were waking to a nightmare rather than an adventure. Inside the mansion of forgotten memories, furniture decayed and paintings had long turned black and moldy. It felt like a place that time had left behind, a world frozen in the past that should have returned to the earth ages before us. We scoured the room, searching for clues that would unlock the next stage of our journey. The next snap clue was a cryptic message. The answer lies where past meets present. It seemed to hint at a connection between the mansion's history and our quest. We delved deeper into the mansion's archives, unearthing old diaries and faded photographs. As the day turned into night, our excitement waned, and an eerie stillness settled into the mansion. We pieced together the story of the mansion's former owner, a recluse obsessed with treasure and old worldly heirlooms. His writings hinted at a hidden chamber within the mansion that was said to hold the key to a new world. The revelation sent shivers down my spine. The idea of unlocking such a chamber filled me with a sense of foreboding, but it also gave our quest a gilded reward at the end. With newfound determination, we embarked on a search of the mansion's secret chamber. Hours passed as we combed through the mansion, searching for hidden passages and concealed entrances. The clock ticked ominously, and the mansion seemed to shift around us, as if guiding us toward our destiny. Finally, we discovered a concealed door in the mansion's basement. It was unremarkable, hidden behind a stack of forgotten crates. With trembling hands, we opened it to reveal a narrow way leading deep underground by ladder. The snap clue was a picture of the ladder with the caption, "Descend into the unknown." "I don't know, this doesn't feel right anymore," I exclaimed as the others began to climb onto the ladder. "Oh, come on," Sarah said as she started to vanish into the underground. "Where else would people hide such valuable treasure?" "Yeah, but why would someone be leading us there?" I asked. But she was already on her way down and out of earshot. I didn't like the feeling of being alone and followed after them. We descended into the darkness, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. The narrow passage led us to a cold yet humid chamber. We used our phone lights to search for the treasure, or at least the next passage, but the light only revealed moist, cobbled walls. Except for the curious object that beckoned at the center of the room, a vintage, analog-style camera. A small message on the camera read, "Capture the moment." Without hesitation, Sarah picked up the camera and aimed it at the group. As the camera's flash went off, a crackling sound sent my stomach fluttering. The ladder lifted suddenly, banging against the sides as it rushed out of sight. We all glanced up the passage, but our phone lights weren't strong enough to reveal anything. "Hello?" Sarah asked. "Okay, this isn't funny." No response only made the pit of my stomach grow wider. "Hey, let us up!" Alex called. We all began shouting, but no responses came, nor any more snaps. We started searching the chamber to see if there were any holes in the walls or places that we could break out. It was useless, and we all began to panic. Mark even attempted to climb up the wall through the passage, but it was too difficult. There was no longer any cell service or internet that we could reach. Hours began to pass. and the fear of becoming unwitting prisoners to someone unknown ate away at me. How could I have been so careless? I wasn't sure if it was relief or more fear that set in when the ladder quietly touched back down. We all stared at one another, hesitant to ascend to whomever awaited above. "Hurry!" a voice echoed down in a near whisper. With a sense of urgency, we made our way up the ladder. We stepped into the view of a familiar face, my friend Thomas. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, thinking the whole thing was just a hideous prank. He gestured to remain quiet, and we followed him out of the mansion. "What's going on?" I asked him. "You weren't the only ones who received the snaps," he explained as we quietly made it back to our vehicles on the other side of the bridge. "I saw all of you and followed behind you. I waited behind and saw a strange man. When I watched him pull the ladder away from all of you, I knew it was something sinister, so I waited for him to leave so I could put the ladder down." We reported our incident to the police, who went back to the mansion but didn't find anything but signs of us shuffling around the dust.
A honeymoon is supposed to be a moment filled with love and sharing blissful moments with the one love of your life. It is a celebration of a life to be lived while being loved, when we would whisper through the hours of the night in our hopes and dreams for one another. Usually, for most couples, it is all glorious and perfect, and when you decide to have your honeymoon on a secluded island that was said to be as beautiful as the stars foretold, then you wouldn't expect anything but perfect. Ethan and I met only a few months ago, but it was love at first sight. I was in love with him as much as he was with me, and getting married felt like the perfect thing to do. So once we finally tied the knot and got married, something felt immediately off. Ethan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he said "I do" on the altar, and he skipped the kissing the bride part, saying he was slightly embarrassed to kiss me in front of so many people. I didn't take it as anything, brushing it off and hoping the honeymoon would work its magic and bring out the parts of Ethan I fell in love with. I should have known things weren't as they were supposed to be when he told me he had changed plans and that we weren't going to the island we had already booked and planned for. I was confused and hurt that he had changed our plans at the last minute, and I asked him where we were going to go now. "Italy." He said it with a grim expression on his face. Despite that, I became excited about the prospect of us going to Italy. Who wouldn't want that? It didn't matter that we had to stay at a hotel for the night before taking a direct flight to Italy. That night, Ethan and I had the best. He was surprisingly clingy too, and he kept saying that he was sorry. I assumed he thought he had hurt me in the bed, so I assured him that he didn't. The next morning, we boarded our flight. I slept all the way through, and Ethan only woke me up when we finally landed in Italy. I grabbed his hand, but he scooted away, muttering that I was making it harder for him. Making it harder for what? I asked, confused as I tried to reach out for his hand again as we walked out of the airport. But Ethan didn't respond, and instead chose to work a few steps ahead of me. A black limousine was waiting for us, and two buff men in black suits were wearing shades. They ordered us to get into the car. The atmosphere felt a bit rigid, and my mind wasn't able to make sense of what was going on. Did Ethan call for security? These men looked more like bodyguards than chauffeurs to drive us to our hotel. I reached out to Ethan next to me, and this time around, he didn't pull away from me. He held me tightly as I asked him, "Where are we going?" He didn't answer. The two men in suits were talking rapidly in Italian as they drove us through the city. I was too confused to enjoy the scenery around me, and the way Ethan was acting made me scared. We arrived at a very large villa, sprawling with several gorgeous flowers and water fountains. I gasped, mesmerized by the view. "Did you rent this place for us to stay in?" I asked Ethan, feeling giddy about it all. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he said, "Yes, honey, I did." He pulled away just as the men in suits opened the door to let us out. We weren't with our luggage, but Ethan assured me that the airport people would bring it to us. He told me I had nothing to worry about, and that all I did was walk into the beautiful house. It was large and so beautiful that it had me wondering exactly how Ethan was able to afford it. He had money, but not very much. just enough to live comfortably and splurge on a little honeymoon once in a while. So it touched me that he seemed to be going all out for our honeymoon. "Ah, welcome, welcome," a voice greeted us, and I looked up to find a short, pudgy man walking towards us. Despite his size and the smile he had on, he looked like someone you wouldn't want to mess with. Standing on both of his sides were large and scary-looking bodyguards who looked like they meant business, and they were armed with guns. "Before I welcome you into my house, I need to handle some unfinished business." The man said that, but Ethan looked confused. "I thought this meant I would be joining you guys," Ethan said as he pointed at me. "You wanted me to bring you a young, beautiful woman, and I did. You said you can make me rich. Then make me rich." The short man chuckled and said, "You aren't getting anything." "But we had a deal," Ethan roared. I couldn't believe my ears. "What do you mean?" The short man was the first to respond, and he had such a powerful tone in his voice. "Your husband wanted to join my mafia, so I asked him to bring me the woman he had fallen in love with. I wanted your ownership, and in exchange, I told him I would make him rich." I felt sick to my stomach. "So, am I some sort of transaction?" Ethan looked at me with loathing. "And one that didn't work well. This is your honeymoon, darling. You belong to him now, and I will be off with my money and a membership in this mafia to protect me." Hurt and betrayal kneeled me over, and I fell on my knees. I couldn't believe how easily Ethan could get rid of me, selling me off to a man just so he could get rich. Even the man seemed disgusted by my husband. "I cannot welcome you to my mafia. No man should do such a thing to his wife." Without warning, he sprung out a gun from under his coat and shot Ethan straight through his head. He fell in a hump. Blood spilling from his body stained the floors crimson. I choked on my cry, not able to do anything but stare at his dead body in shock. He had just killed my husband, the very man who was going to sell me off to a mafia king. I was appalled, and I didn't know exactly what else to feel. "Ah, bellissima," the man called, and my blood went cold. I couldn't stop myself from shivering so much as I watched the very man who had murdered my husband seconds ago approach me. I was terrified to say the least, and he pretended to not notice me quiver. He continued in a heavy Italian accent. "Don't look too hurt, my darling. The man doesn't deserve you. A man should hold his woman highly. But now, you belong to me. I will take care of you, Bella, and you will do everything I tell you to do." I heard his words, but it was harder to make sense of it all. He took my hand and led me into his house, and it felt like a death sentence. It felt like no one was walking into a beautifully decorated cage. My name wasn't Bella, but it didn't matter, because I was now the property of a man.
Last week, I took a 48-hour bus ride to visit my aunt and uncle in Denver. Most of the way, I listened to music through my earbuds while an old red-haired woman snored loudly next to me. By the time we crossed into Colorado, my earbuds had run out of battery, so I couldn't listen to music anymore. I decided to use the bus's Wi-Fi and scroll through Instagram. I've been posting photos of the scenery through my whole trip, and I saw that a lot of people were commenting. Suddenly, I got a new notification for a new follower. Some dark-haired guy named James. I didn't recognize his photo, and his account was set to private, so I didn't follow him back. The bus stopped for a 30-minute bathroom break in some mountain town, and we all had to get out. I walked around the bathrooms and snapped some photos of the mountains in the distance. By the time I was finished, the driver was already calling for us to get back in the bus. I went to my seat, but the red-haired lady was no longer sitting next to me. Instead, it was a young guy with dark hair. It took me a second to realize that it was James, the one who had just followed me on Instagram. I guess he'd been sitting behind me for the whole drive. I smiled at him and then sat down. He introduced himself and explained that the red-haired woman had gotten off at the last stop, and he wanted to sit next to me. He asked if it was okay. I was a bit creeped out, but I was too awkward to tell him no. The bus got back on the road. James and I chatted for a bit about how beautiful the surroundings were, and he complimented me on my Instagram photos. He seemed like a nice enough guy, but he came on a little too strong. He was acting like we were suddenly best friends just because he started following me on Instagram. I put my earbuds back in even though they didn't work, just so I had an excuse not to talk to him. He didn't take the hint. He brought up Instagram again and asked me why I didn't follow him back. I politely told him that I would once we got to Denver, but that wasn't good enough for him. He told me to do it right now because he wanted me to see all of his photos. He said that I was an expert photographer and he knew that I'd appreciate his stuff. I begrudgingly pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. I went back to my notifications and found his account. He watched me as I clicked the follow button. I didn't like how insistent he was. I told myself as soon as we got off the bus in Denver, I'd immediately unfollow him. I don't like people telling me what to do. He didn't accept my request at first. He just sat there, smiling at me. Then he asked, "Are you extreme?" I had no idea what he was getting at. Not really," I said. "I am," he told me. Then he waited for me to ask why, but I didn't feel like it. The sun was already setting, though I wasn't really tired at all. He nudged me on the side. "Don't go to sleep yet," he said. "I want you to see my photos." I opened my eyes and turned towards him again. I was about to tell him off, but there was something in his expression that unnerved me. I really didn't want to piss him off. So I looked down at my phone. He'd accepted my friend request, so now I could see everything he posted, and it was horrifying. The description said that he was a special effects makeup artist, and all of his photos were of murder victims. Really gory stuff. Blood oozing down people's faces, severed limbs, corpses. "Do you like them?" he asked. "They're very realistic," I told him. "You should see my latest one. I think you'll really like it." He smiled as he posted another photo. It took me a second, but when I saw it on my phone, I gasped. It showed an old red-haired woman with a knife stuck in her head. The same woman that had been sitting next to me for most of the bus ride. I could tell from the background of the photo that it was taken next to the bathrooms at our last stop. James wasn't a makeup artist at all. These photos were real. He murdered all these people, including that poor old lady. But why? Was it just because he wanted to sit next to me? He watched my expression change, waiting for me to figure out that he was a psychopath. "You're not going to say anything, are you?" he asked. "Please, don't hurt me," I whispered. He laughed. "On a bus filled with people, I would never." It was now pitch black outside, and we still had an hour before we got to Denver. I was frozen in my seat, too scared to move. James wouldn't stop staring at me. "Want to see something cool?" he asked. I really didn't, but I was too afraid to answer. He reached into the front pocket of his sweater and pulled out a bloody knife. It was the one he used on the red-haired woman, and it was still stained with blood. Cool, right? I can't wait to use it again. Panicked, I started to get out of my seat, but he pulled me back down. I could feel the edge of the knife pressing against my side. He leaned closer and whispered in my ear, "Don't make a scene." "What do you want from me? I promise I won't say anything." "I just want you to like my work," he said. "I could tell from your Instagram that you have tons of followers, and I'm a little jealous. I want to be popular too. Maybe if I take your photo, I'd get a lot of followers too." I hated that I was so scared. Then I realized that all I needed to do was play by his rules. So I told him that we could take a selfie on my phone and that I'd tag him. He seemed surprised by the offer. But then he put the knife back in his pocket and said, "Okay." I raised my phone and very quickly snapped a selfie of the two of us. Then I posted it. He looked at the photo on his phone, and that distracted him long enough for me to jump out of my seat and run towards the front of the bus. I screamed for the driver to stop. The driver slammed on the brakes and looked at me angrily. I pointed at James, who had stood up, and told the driver that James had assaulted me. The driver didn't ask any questions. I guess he'd dealt with inappropriate passengers before. He opened the bus door and ordered James to get out, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. James walked down the aisle, smiling from ear to ear. He looked at me just one more time and then walked off the bus. "See you soon," he said, before the doors closed behind him. I got back in my seat and we kept driving on. It took me a while to calm down. Pretty soon we made it to Denver, and I went straight from the bus station to the police station. I told the cops everything that happened, but when I tried to show them James on Instagram, he had already blocked me. The cops assured me that they would look into it. It's been 2 days now, and I still don't know what happened. I haven't looked on my Instagram since.
It was my 21st birthday, and the room was spinning. My head felt very light, and I wanted to vomit. I wanted to punch myself until I didn't feel the insistent chime in my stomach, and I wanted it all to stop. I wanted them all to leave, to go away, and to cease the noise that surrounded me. My ears were ringing. A party song was playing in the background, and people were dancing to the beats. I could hear someone say that I was finally old enough to drink, and another one say I was ready to be sorted by a man. It all made me very sick, and I wanted it to stop. I was wearing a red dress. It fell right on my skin and made me hyperventilate. My mom said it was fine, and that I looked great in the dress. She snickered about me finally getting a boyfriend, and even joked about red dresses and other things. Like blood. I was thinking of blood, but not the kind my mother was referring to. I felt the coppery feeling of it at the back of my mouth, and I was suddenly craving some blood to soak my hands in. I wondered what would happen if they saw me, their sweet little Betty, blood-soaked. "Betty, come dance with us," Stephanie called. She was smirking at me, but others could easily see it as a smile. Stephanie was my best friend. She had the whitest teeth and the shiniest hair, and right now, it was her blood I wanted to see on my hands. I shook my head at her, not trusting myself to speak and respond to her plea. I pretended as though I didn't notice how delighted she was. I was visibly shaking, and it was exactly what she wanted from me. I was excited about my birthday. I was finally going to be able to get my driver's license and drive around. I would be a legal adult and be able to drink and do a lot of things. It was supposed to be a wonderful day. Mom and Dad were going to gift me a new car. I was pretty. I had a boyfriend who was in college, and I had the best friend I could kill for. Stephanie was everything to me until a few months ago. My stomach roiled just at the thought of it. My birthday present wasn't a surprise. I knew it was going to happen, and I helped plan it all. But she insisted that I pretend as though I didn't know about it. I was to come home and act surprised at the people at my home wishing me a happy birthday. "It'll be fun and perfect for the photos," Stephanie had said as she twisted her hair around her finger. "Besides, you're a talented actress and it will all look good." "You think so?" I had asked, and she nodded. The thing about Stephanie was that she would make you believe something, even if you knew deep down that it was a lie. So I followed her home after I got ready at her place, and right before we walked in, she pulled me aside and she said she had a surprise for me. "What is it?" I asked eagerly. Stephanie grinned, a wicked grin I can never forget, then whispered in my ears, "I hooked up with your boyfriend like a million times, and I kind of want it for myself. Jacob was going to tell you later, but I couldn't hold it in any longer." Ever since I knew Stephanie, I was always second to her in everything. She was pretty, her parents were rich, and she had better grades. The only thing Stephanie didn't have was my boyfriend, Jacob. Her revelation made me sick, and I turned red with anger. I felt pain and betrayal in such a way that it felt as hot as acid in my heart. It was as though she had ripped my soul apart and stamped on it. Stephanie grinned, then skipped into the house, leaving me behind, reeling. The pain and fiery anger from within me didn't simmer down. It only grew hotter and more unbearable. I watched her throughout the party, and she knew that I did. I would catch her blowing kisses to Jason, who would look shy and stare somewhere else. I wanted to spill blood. It triggered me to think that Stephanie could easily take away something that was mine without remorse, not caring about how I felt. I wasn't going to let her get away with it this time around. I simply couldn't. I was going to teach both of them a lesson. But now that I needed to pretend to enjoy my party, I drowned acrid vodka, and it only fed on the fire inside of me. "Time for the piñata," someone yelled. I wasn't sure who it was, but I smiled brightly at everyone and nodded. Jason stood next to me and kissed my cheek, and all I wanted to do was blow his brains out. It was a sort of family thing to keep the piñata tradition, no matter how old we were, but the candy replaced money. My cousin Sasha came over and wrapped a cloth around my eyes. It was see-through and nobody could tell. She then placed a baseball bat in my hands, and I finally smiled my first genuine smile of the night. I was ready to bash something open. Everyone around me cheered as I walked towards the piñata right before me. People crowded the piñata, ready to grab the money the second I hit it. I was good at this, and my vision was clear. So, when I swung, I didn't hit the target. The sound resonated around me, and the room fell silent. But I didn't stop. I hit again and again and again. The sound of breaking bones filled me with satisfaction. Now, people were screaming. Someone begged me to stop, but nobody did anything as I continued to hit my best friend over and over again. There was so much. People were crying for me to stop, a look of horror in their faces as I continued to hit Stephanie with the baseball bat. She was dead already, but I wasn't done yet. I felt electric. I felt alive. I didn't stop until her face was mangled, and blood covered her face and the floor. And some of the blood even got on my hands. It was sticky and warm. I finally stopped and stepped back from Stephanie's now dead body. I wouldn't have to see her smirk anymore, and she wouldn't be able to steal what was mine. "A happy birthday to me," I said, and I turned around to find everyone looking at me in horror. Jason's face was ashen with terror. He knew why I had just killed Stephanie, and he knew he would be next. I gave Jason a huge smile before I turned to look at everyone else and said, "Let's continue the party, shall we?" Nobody spoke. The silence in the room was nearly choking. I was the birthday girl. Didn't I have the liberty to do anything I wanted on my special day?
Some days I feel skinnier than all the other days. Sometimes I can't tell if my body belongs to me.
My cousin Samantha set me up on a date with her friend Carson. I'd just gotten over a pretty bad relationship, so I wasn't interested in any dates for a while. Besides, Samantha had the tendency to date pretty terrible men, so I didn't really trust her opinion. But she was insistent. She assured me that Carson and I had a lot in common. Eventually, I gave in and agreed to meet him for dinner. When I got to the restaurant, I was shocked at how handsome Carson was. He seemed really charming too. We ordered food and had a very nice conversation. We talked about our mutual interest, especially movies and books and stuff, and it seemed as though he liked all the things that I did. It was the perfect date, but after a while, I realized that it felt too perfect. It was like Carson had memorized all my interests and was just repeating them back to me. It felt kind of rehearsed. So by the time the dinner was over, I thanked him for a wonderful meal and hurried out of the restaurant. I told him that I'd call him, but he could tell that was a lie. When I was halfway to my house, Samantha called me. She asked how the date went, expecting to hear good news. But I was honest with her. I told her that Carson was too perfect. I didn't ask her if she was the one who told him everything about me because I assumed that she had. Samantha did not take that well. Her voice sounded panicked and she started begging me. Please give him another chance. I asked her why she was so invested, but she didn't answer. Instead, she just kept repeating that Carson was a great guy and we were perfect for each other. Again, I told her no. Then she started crying. She was trying to hide it, but she wasn't doing a very good job. I knew that there was something she wasn't telling me, so I made a U-turn and started driving to her house. I figured I could talk to her directly and find out what was going on. As soon as I got there, I saw an extra car parked in her driveway. It was Carson's. He must have driven straight to her house after our date. I parked across the street so they wouldn't see me, and then I snuck around to the side of her house. When I looked through the window, I saw Carson screaming into Samantha's face. He looked completely unhinged, the exact opposite of how he seemed on our date. I got very close to the window and pressed my ear against the glass so I could hear what they were saying. I couldn't hear Samantha because she was mostly whimpering, but Carson's voice was pretty easy to hear. You promised she'd like me. You said we could be together. She whimpered something, but it must not have been a good enough answer because Carson shoved her against the wall. He looked like he was really going to hurt her. I couldn't just watch anymore. I ran to the front door and into her house. They both turned to look at me. What the hell is going on? I asked. By that point, Samantha had fallen to the ground. Please, get out of here, she told me. No, Carson said. I'm glad she's here. He started walking toward me. Why didn't you like me? I said everything you wanted to hear. I wasn't about to defend myself. He was the one beating up on my cousin. If anyone needed to explain themselves, it was him. I watched as he reached into his pocket. For a second, I thought he was going to pull out a gun, but instead he pulled out a gold necklace. He explained that he was going to give it to me at dinner, but I had rushed off before he had the chance. He held the necklace in front of him as if he was going to place it around my neck. I wouldn't let him get near me. I tried to walk around him and get closer to Samantha. I don't want your necklace, I said. Carson threw the necklace across the room. His eyes narrowed in pure anger, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Samantha, as if she was the reason our date hadn't gone well. Just tell me what's going on, I demanded. Samantha was too afraid to answer. Carson said, I helped your cousin with a little problem, and for payment, she promised me you. Samantha looked up at me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. What little problem? I asked. Larry, she said. Larry was her terrible ex-boyfriend who had always been awful to her, but they'd broken up a few weeks before. At least that's what I thought. With a wide smile, Carson explained that he'd murdered Samantha's ex and disposed of his body as a favor. And in return, Samantha promised him a date with me. I turned towards Samantha and asked her if that was true. She didn't say anything, which was all the answer I needed. I ordered Carson to leave, but he wouldn't. I told him that I wasn't interested in him, that I never would be. He didn't move. Again, I told him to go away. If I leave, he said, I'm going straight to the police and telling them exactly what Samantha did to her ex. Samantha whimpered behind me. Of course, he continued, looking straight into my eyes. I would never do that if you came home with me right now. I'll do it, I said, my voice shaking. I'll go with you. I couldn't believe it. I had actually agreed to go with this monster. My brain had surrendered at that moment. For the next 1 week, Carson did unspeakable things to me. Things I am too scared to speak of. On the 8th day, I was exhausted and broken. But that night, when he ordered me to go down on him for the 100th time, I bit him. Ow! As the monster lay in front of me screaming in pain, I couldn't help but stare at him. I watched him shout and ask for help. I ran straight to the police station and reported them everything. Samantha and Carson were arrested and charged with the murder of Samantha's ex-boyfriend. Samantha was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Carson was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. I was grateful to be alive, but I was also traumatized by what I had experienced. I spent months in therapy dealing with the aftermath of my abuse.
Last Halloween, I was supposed to go to a costume party with my boyfriend Ben, but then he broke up with me just a few days before, so I ended up with no plans whatsoever. We'd been together for 3 years, and the breakup came completely out of nowhere. The only excuse he gave me was that I deserved better. I assumed that he had just found someone else. He packed all his stuff and left town before I could find out what was going on. So on Halloween, I decided to just stay at home and pass out candy to trick-or-treaters and watch horror movies on my couch. And it really wasn't a great night. After sunset, the trick-or-treaters started to come. I saw a few really cute costumes, and most of the kids were pretty adorable. But after a while, I started noticing that more and more of the trick-or-treaters were teenagers. Pretty old-looking teenagers, too. Most of them just grabbed the candy out of my hands without a thank you or anything. It started to get frustrating. In the past, I would have just ignored this, but I was in a pretty awful mental space because of my breakup, and I didn't want to put up with any crap. Eventually, these 2 older boys showed up at my door. Both were much taller than me. One just had a black cape over his normal clothes, and the other one wore a white t-shirt with the word costume written in black marker. They mumbled trick or treat, and then just glared at me until I gave them something. I know I should have just smiled and given them some chocolate, but instead, I told them no. I said they were too old to be trick-or-treating, and I was saving the candy for actual children. The one in the cape started to say something, but the other one grabbed him by the arm and then whispered something in his friend's ear. Then they both started laughing and walked away. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know that those 2 were planning some sort of prank on me in retaliation. That's just what teens do. Honestly, I wasn't too afraid. If they end up throwing toilet paper in my yard, I'd just clean it up in the morning. So I closed the door and went back to watching a movie. After that, I only had about 10 more trick-or-treaters come to my door. It was getting pretty late, and it seemed like our neighborhood was starting to wind down. Some time passed, and I completely forgot about those 2 teens. I was in my living room, forcing myself to stop thinking about my ex. Then out of nowhere, I noticed someone walking around in my backyard. I remembered the teens from earlier and realized that they'd come back. I went to the window to get a better look, and I saw that it was just one of the teens. He'd changed his outfit. Now he was wearing all black, including a black mask that covered his face. The ironic thing was that if he had dressed like that when he was trick-or-treating, I probably would have given him candy. It was an actual costume instead of the half-assed outfit that he wore earlier. I saw something big and long in his arms. He was carrying a baseball bat. That's when I got really angry. Throwing toilet paper was harmless enough, but he was obviously going to trash my place and probably break some windows. I should have called the police, but I was so angry that I didn't even think of that. I ran to my sliding glass door and threw it open. "Hey!" I shouted. "Get out of here!" The man looked at me. Instead of running away, he just stood there, slapping the baseball bat against his palm over and over. Up close, I realized that this man was bigger than either of the teens I saw earlier. This was someone else. I slammed the door shut and then locked it, but the man casually walked up to the glass door and stared at me from the other side. He didn't move. Then, in a burst of motion, he slammed the bat against my door. The glass shattered instantly. Then he stepped inside. I looked around for my phone, but I couldn't remember where I'd left it. The man walked slowly toward me. He held the bat against his shoulder. I jumped over the couch and raced toward the hallway. I needed to make it to my bedroom so I could lock myself inside. Just as I reached my bedroom door, he grabbed me from behind and pulled me back. He was so strong. He slammed me against the wall. I screamed for help. While I was on the ground, he kicked me against the side and ordered me to shut up. His voice was low and deep, but it also sounded familiar. This was someone I knew. What do you want? I whimpered. He raised the bat over his head, ready to slam it down. Stop! I begged. Who are you? I'm here for my payment, he said. That's when I realized who this was. I'd met him a few times before, but I never learned his name. He was one of Ben's gambling buddies. He'd always given me the creeps. One time, I caught him slamming Ben against the side of a building and threatening him over something. Afterwards, Ben had assured me that he'd stopped hanging out with the guy, but I guess not. Does Ben owe you money? I asked him. Because we're not together anymore. We broke up. He started laughing. I don't believe that. That's when it all came together. Ben had gotten himself mixed up with this guy. He probably owed him a bunch of money. That's why he left me. That's why he fled town. And without Ben here, this guy was after me. With a low grunt, he slammed the baseball bat down. It would have hit me, but I rolled out of the way. Help! I screamed again. I tried to crawl into my bedroom, but he grabbed my ankle and pulled me back. No one's gonna hear you, he said. I couldn't escape. He raised the bat again, but before he could strike me, two figures came out of nowhere and grabbed him by the arms. The baseball bat fell to the ground. I watched in shock as the masked man was pushed onto the ground. The two teens from earlier had come back. They went absolutely crazy on the guy, hitting and kicking him over and over until he was a bloody, whimpering mess on my carpet. Then the man stopped moving. I didn't know if he was unconscious or dead. I jumped to my feet and grabbed my phone. I'd left it on the end table. After calling the police, I walked back to the teens and asked what happened. We came here to toilet paper your house, the one in the cape said. That's when we heard you scream for help. I couldn't believe it. If they hadn't come back to prank me, I would have been killed. Wait right there, I said. Let me get you some candy.
First dates have always been awkward for me. I have the unfortunate luck of never seeming to be able to find someone I could instantly hit off with. My friend Stacy thought it would be an excellent idea to play matchmaker and pair me with someone. It's a friend of Ryle, Stacy said, referring to her boyfriend of 2 weeks whom she met on a dating app. Unlike me, Stacy was a fun and bubbly person who didn't find it very hard to hit it off instantly with someone. But Stacy insisted, and so did Ryle, and they set me up with a friend of his. His name was Jay, and I was supposed to meet him a few days later. Stacy told me about the condo that Ryle rented for them to spend the holidays in, so she wasn't here to calm my nerves on the night of the first date, and I couldn't reach her cell. I was nervous. I only knew Jay from the photo that Stacy sent me, and he seemed like a decent person. We met at Pablo's, a restaurant that I often frequented with Stacy. I needed the stability of someplace I knew and was comfortable with, but when Jay came over to meet me at the restaurant, he didn't quite like it. "What's wrong?" I asked, terrified that this date would turn out horrible. Jay gave me a shy smile and said, "I'm vegetarian and I don't feel comfortable here." I wanted to assure him that they had a vegan menu at Pablo's, but he just wanted to leave, so I agreed. We both got into his car, which was an Audi. Jay was cute and he kept trying to make me smile and laugh, and although he wasn't half as funny as he thought he was, I still found it adorable. Besides, Jay acted nervous so much that I got concerned and asked him if he was okay. He told me that this was his first time taking a pretty girl like me on a date, and he wasn't sure if I would want to just drive around instead of eat. Now, I was hungry, but his words made me blush, and I agreed. We drove a little as he told me a story about a prank gone wrong, and I laughed at all the right times. Time seemed to fly by, so much so that I didn't notice the fact that we were driving out of town. Confused, I turned to Jay. "Where are we going?" His words were careful, almost too careful for them not to have been rehearsed, but at that moment, I didn't catch on. "I want to show you this cool place just outside of town. I swear the air is fresher and we can see the stars so much better," Jay said. We kept going. I grew anxious as to where he was going. The night was only getting late and I practically had no idea where I was going. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where are we going?" My voice was shaking as I asked, and it dawned on me that I didn't know him. I had hopped in a car, but surely nothing would happen to me, right? It was as though his facade was falling, and Jay didn't seem like the nervous, nice guy who wanted to laugh anymore. If anything, he looked annoyed that I was asking where he was taking me. "God, you can't keep your nosy butt out of this," he said as he pulled an unlabeled canned spray and spritzed it on my face without warning. "I was going to take you there peacefully, but you leave me no choice." I coughed and tried to fight it, but there seemed to be some sort of chemical mixed into it that was making me drowsy. I didn't want to close my eyes, but the next thing I knew, my world had turned black as I blacked out. I woke up to a terrible ache around my arms. Wincing, I tried to move it, but it seemed impossible to. My senses slowly returned to me, and that was when I realized that I was in the middle of the woods. Tall trees was all I could see at first, until my eyes zeroed in on a pathetic figure laying on the ground a few feet from me. It was Stacy, tied up and beaten up so much that it was hard to imagine she was still alive. I tried to scream, but the words didn't come out because of the gag around my mouth. My face whipped up to find a very angry Jay screaming at Ryle. My brain was still woozy, but I could make out part of the conversation. Ryle had killed Stacy instead of selling her off to a rich guy like it was planned, and Jay didn't seem happy about it. "What will we do if we get caught with the dead body?" Jay screamed. Ryle looked sullen. "Well, sorry, but she found out about our business and was going to tell everyone. What else was I supposed to do?" I couldn't believe what was going on. Fear clogged my mind, and I realized Stacy wasn't just dying, but already dead. And we were supposed to be sold off and shipped to a different part of the world. I wanted to puke. I wanted to cry and yell at them to bring back my best friend, but I couldn't do that. It took them a moment to realize that I was awake and that I heard everything they were saying. A moment passed by when they were wondering what they should do with me. Kill me? I was shivering on the inside. What they didn't know was that I had a knife in my back pocket, and that I was slowly yet surely sawing through the ropes that tied my hands back. I needed them to be distracted enough for me to escape the night of horrors. But how could I even move on from this when my own best friend was brutally murdered by the very person she was dating? They were supposed to be on a romantic holiday together, but now I couldn't even hear Stacy's laugh if I wanted to. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears began rolling down my eyes, and it made my vision blurry. By then, I'd finally cut through the ropes and was waiting for the right time to make a run for it. Soon, they decided to bury Stacy's body before coming back for me. The second they turned around and got busy, I made a run for it. I didn't look back. I couldn't see where I was going due to the tears in my eyes, but I didn't stop. Out of sheer luck, I stumbled right onto Jay's black Audi from earlier, and the key was still in it. Cold water was running down on me as my hand slipped around the door handle to the car. By then, I was sure Jay and Ryle had noticed I was gone, and they were tracking me down. I wasn't a good driver at night, but none of that mattered as I pressed the pedal and struggled to find the road back to town. I might have escaped the horrors of that night, but it lives with me, has clung to me like a second skin. I can still smell Stacy's dead body as she passed on to death a few feet from me, and the rain as I made my way to the car before driving off. I barely had any recollection of what happened after I got to the car, but I reported the case, and it seemed as though both Jay and Ryle disappeared from the face of the earth. So did Stacy, except she left silently. My favorite thing about being on social media is how easily you can talk to friends, chat about your daily life, and text them as often as you want to. And sometimes even get to meet new people and be friends with them. People you might not have met in real life who have the same interest as you, whom you instantly click with them, and you find yourself talking to them every day. I had an Instagram friend, Alyssa, and although she doesn't live in Ohio, where I live, it didn't stop us from becoming the closest of friends. She would send me funny memes, and I would often tell her about all the things I did, not even leaving out the mundane parts of them. Alyssa was a good listener and supportive friend, and she always seemed to have the best bits of advice. I've known her for over half a year, and we haven't met. I was eager to see her in person, to be able to hug her, hold her, and talk about boys and annoying college professors. I wanted us to go to my favorite ice cream place together, go to parties, and just have a blast. So, when Alyssa texted me through Instagram that she was coming to Ohio for Halloween, I was elated to say the least. I couldn't believe I was finally meeting my Instagram friend. I began to count down the days until she came, wondering how it would feel to finally see her in person. She came to Ohio only 2 days before Halloween. The streets were already riddled with Halloween decorations, and children and adults alike were all thinking of either trick-or-treating or parties to attend. I was a sort of loner who didn't have friends in real life, but none of that mattered since Alyssa was coming. I finally met her the day after she arrived. It was only a day until Halloween, and I still hadn't picked out my outfit. I was beginning to think I wouldn't be going to any parties this year, but Alyssa was quick to change my mind. She was as lovely in real life as she was on Instagram, and just as gorgeous. She hugged me tightly and told me all about the Halloween party of the year that was going to be here in Ohio. It was a huge deal, as all the big influencers on Instagram would be there, she said. It'll be so fun if you come with me to the party. Please, Beth. Alyssa exclaimed while grinning. I wasn't sure at first, but Alyssa made it sound like it was the best event in town. But I don't even have a Halloween outfit, I said to her. But Alyssa only shook her head as though it wasn't a problem before pulling out 2 matching outfits from the duffel bag she had come with. I gasped as she pulled out 2 identical Saw outfits, from the ghastly white and red mask to the gangly suit that was somehow made sexy. Alyssa even had 2 saws with her that looked so realistic I couldn't believe they were only costumes. They looked like if I were to press my finger against the jagged ends of the saw, it would chop it off. I had no idea she was this prepared, and I didn't have another reason for not going anymore. If anything, the costumes made me excited to go. And the party is going to be live streamed on Instagram, so you better perform your best. Alyssa wiggled her brows as she said it, and I laughed, even though I had no idea what that meant. But it seemed like she thought of it as a big deal, and I was ready to do anything my friend wanted to do. At that moment, I had no idea how terrible it could all be. The party was a few streets away from my house, and the house was a little hidden from the main roads. Alyssa mentioned how parties could go with them, and nobody wanted the cops to be notified of any of that. I didn't plan to drink that much at a party where I only knew Alyssa, so the talk of cops didn't bother me. The party had already started when we got there, so many people were dressed as horror movie characters with axes and real-looking guns, and the most gruesome versions of innocent characters like Alice in Wonderland. It looked like every murderer's Wonderland, and I was fascinated by the designs and how much attention to detail there was. Isn't this all great? Alyssa said as she passed me a cup of punch, and I downed it immediately, only to realize it was spiked. I nearly choked on it and made a mental note to not drink any more of it. I nodded along to whatever Alyssa said while I felt the heaviness of the saw I was holding. Alyssa leaned down and muttered to my ears, "Be careful with that saw. It can cut through bone." I made sure of it. Oh, and make good use of it. She winked at me, but before I could say anything else, the lights dimmed around me.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough, you wanna hate this, I'll show up.
I didn't understand what was going on until it was too late. I could see the video cameras that were live streaming on Instagram. Everyone could see the Halloween party, and it took me too long to realize that this wasn't a regular party. This was a massacre. A ringing sound exploded through unseen speakers while people waited with held breaths, and the nightmare began. People wore their Halloween masks tightly and drew their weapons. Within seconds, all I could see was red.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
It was a massacre, and I was in the middle of it. I couldn't move. I was panicking, and I stood rooted to my spot. Cries of victory and anguish were all I heard around me as more gunshots punctured the heads and eyes of people. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I couldn't believe what was going on. I needed to leave, but my head began feeling dizzy. I could barely walk or make a path, and that was when Alyssa came to me. Her eyes were twinkling, and blood that wasn't hers coated the saw she was holding. "Having fun?" she said with a sickly smile, but I wasn't. I wanted to leave and never come back. I wanted the cops to barge in and stop this mess. I told Alyssa that I wanted to leave, but she said I couldn't, that the viewers of the private Instagram stream were enjoying this bloodbath, and I needed to kill to survive. She said all I had to do was survive for the next 5 minutes and it would all be over. But surviving meant getting my hands wet with the blood of others in this room, and I wasn't sure I could do that. I was living a Halloween nightmare, and I begged and cried for it to end, but no one was willing to listen. I guess it wasn't a good idea to have an Instagram friend after all, because now I wasn't sure I had what it took to be Alyssa's friend.
It took my parents forever to trust me to stay home alone. Do you know how embarrassing it is to be 12 years old with a babysitter? None of my friends at school had a babysitter anymore. Sure, some of them had older siblings, but still. Some of them were the oldest of their siblings, or an only child like me, and their parents let them stay home alone. My parents waited until I was 13 to stay home alone. But after the first time, I wasn't as upset they made me wait so long. I actually preferred to go to a friend's house after all that transpired. It was a stormy Friday night. My parents were going out for their anniversary. I didn't know how long they had been together at that point because I never cared to ask. I assumed it was like 15 or something because they hadn't celebrated their anniversary or even mentioned it before. It was liberating to finally be left alone, even if all I planned to do was eat pizza and watch an R-rated movie or a bunch of South Park. "Todd!" my mom called for me before they left. She and my dad stood by the front door. I met them there. "What's up?" I said. "Remember, if you need anything, and I mean anything, you just call. I will have my phone on me the whole night, okay?" Yeah, I got it. Just have a fun night," I shrugged her off. "Make sure to stay out as late as possible," I joked. My mom rolled her eyes, kissed me on the cheek, and was off. After they left, I threw a pizza in the oven and went down to the basement. We live in a one-story ranch with a basement. My bedroom and everything was in the basement. It wasn't huge, so it felt like my den. A TV, couch, and ping pong table were on one side. On the other was my bedroom and bathroom. Small rectangular windows lined the top of the ceiling. I turned on the TV and started flipping through the channels to see what was on. I thought another teenager would throw a party or have a girl over, and here I was alone, watching TV. If I were to do something like that and get caught, though, my parents would never leave me alone again. Before I could really take advantage of being alone, I needed to figure out things, like when they would come home. I didn't even plan on going near the liquor cabinet. For all I knew, my mom would be calling me every hour to check on me. The door to the basement was across from the front door, so I made my way up the stairs. When I opened the front door, no one was there. I stepped out on the porch and looked around, but it was dead silent. No one was around. I dismissed it as a ding-dong ditch situation and went back downstairs. Right when I sat back down on the couch, someone knocked. Back up the stairs I went, annoyed this time. I opened the door and again, no one was there. "Hello?" I said to see if someone would respond or if I could hear giggling from the bushes or something. There was nothing, just more silence. Not even the wind rustled the leaves. I headed back inside. Right as I opened the door to the basement, someone pounded on the front door. They turned the knob and shook the door. I turned around, stunned. My heart pounded against my chest and my hands began to tremble. Our front door had no window, so I couldn't see who or what it was. Quietly, I tried to creep up to the door to look out the peephole, but again, there was no one. They didn't have much time to run away, but they could still be standing beside the door out of view, I thought. I went to the window in the living room and looked out. There wasn't a living thing in sight. I checked the front and back sliding glass doors to ensure they were locked. For extra security, I put the wooden rod in the back door, so even if someone could jimmy the lock, the rod would stop the door. I put a chair in front of the front door to give the illusion of extra security. I texted my mom to ask her to let me know when they were headed back so I could move the chair. I didn't want them to know I got spooked. Maybe my friends were playing a prank on me or something. I told them at school that tonight the house was mine. They live nearby, and they would love an opportunity to spook me. The idea that it was them soothed me. By this time, my pizza was ready. I pulled it out of the oven and cut it up. With my pizza and a Mountain Dew, I resumed my night in the basement. I ended up watching South Park. I was hoping for some R-rated movie that had some ladies with big jugs, but I couldn't find anything. I settled in and started enjoying my pizza. As I started on my last slice, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in one of the windows. My head shot in that direction, and there was nothing other than darkness. I turned my head back to the TV, and in the window above the TV, there was a face of a scruffy pale man with wide green eyes staring at me. My body froze. I rubbed my eyes, hoping it was just a weird light thing, but the man remained. He didn't blink even once. Slowly, I got up, turning away from him when I was close enough to the stairs to bolt up them. I reached the top of the stairs and pulled my phone out to call my mom. As the phone rang, I went through everything I had done to secure the house so that the guy couldn't get in. I rounded the corner to the kitchen, and the man was pounding against the sliding glass door. "Todd," the scruffy man said. How did he know my name? He kept repeating my name and hitting the door. I ran to hide in my parents' bathroom, where there wasn't any windows. Sitting on the floor in the bathroom, I could hear the man pounding on the door and yelling my name. I had to call my mom 3 times before she answered. Once I told her what happened, she immediately called the police for me and headed home. The police came and took the man into custody. That night, my mom revealed to me that the guy was actually my biological father, who had been institutionalized after stalking my mother when she became pregnant with me. He had substance issues that apparently fried his mind. She didn't want me to think I would turn out like my father, so she kept him a secret. Honestly, after being so scared that I almost peed my pants, I wasn't that upset with her.